Oh, you push the top.
No, you guys are first line. There's a couple.
Oh, okay. We just a bit of a catalyst. So it's just a name. Hi, Russ. How you doing?
John Howard. Hope these gentlemen will participate. Good. Ross is the head of so very germane to what we're doing.
Oh, look at all these fun presentations.
If it's really good, maybe I'll get your autograph. If not, I'll
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Regional Services Committee meeting for August 22nd. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the Coast Salish territory and a very smoky Wednesday morning. And also welcome Alternate Director Morris and Alternate Director McGuire. Good morning. So moving on to adoption of the minutes, approval of the agenda, and the Corporate Secretary, we have some additions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My apologies to the committee. 2 items were missed during the production of the agendas. In front of you, you are aware of NB1. That's the Environmentally Sensitive Areas Strategy. That report is for information, and there will be a presentation. I circulated that to you on Monday. And we also have an NB2 2018 Curbside Contamination Outreach. This report also has a presentation with it, and it's going to be presented by one of our summer students who will not be here after next week, and that person's the subject expert in this area, so it would be timely to add both NB1 and NB2 to the agenda.
Thank you. So with those changes, it's been moved and seconded. And all in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. I also like to note that there is no video. We are not streaming live today. We are just recording currently.
And Madam Chair, clarification on that. The video of this meeting is being recorded and will be available tomorrow.
Oh,
Possibly later this afternoon, but not right at this moment.
Thank you. Moving on to the adoption of the minutes of the Regional Service Committee, July 25th. Moved, seconded. Any questions? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Moving on now to any business arising from the minutes.
No business arising?
Moving to the public input period. Is there anybody in the gallery who would like to speak on anything on the agenda? Seeing none, moving on to delegations. I'd like to welcome Robert Stitt to the podium. Good morning, Robert. It's a Duncan Flying Club. You just have to press the button there.
Okay.
You can move it up a little bit to your, yes.
Madam Chair, directors, staff, and other visitors. My name is Robert Stitt. I'm an area resident and a member of the Duncan Flying Club. I'm joined today by John Howroyd, who's the president of the Duncan Flying Club, and from Abbotsford, coming over especially for the presentation today, is Mr. George Miller. And George is a subject matter expert in terms of rejuvenating and commercializing community airports. So with that in mind, Madam Chair, if we could have an additional 10 minutes today so that George could contribute to the presentation, it'd be much appreciated.
I've said it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
So I have a presentation here which I understand most of you have already seen. How is that? Am I on? Okay. Should be. Here we go. Just a little bit of background. Is it on? Can you see this?
There it is now.
It is.
Yes, it's just
Thank
come up now.
The origins of this initiative go back to a conversation that the Duncan Flying Club had with Economic Development Cowichan manager, Ms. Amy Melmock, and this came about as a result of our growing awareness that there was a longer term planning initiative going on in a number of different ways, Cowichan 2050, and in particular at that time the industrial land base study that was conducted. And as an organization that takes a keen interest in air access in the valley in particular, we started to see a bit of a possibility of combining what we saw as some of the needs in the area with some of the activities that the CVRD was taking on. And so this is a bit of an update for everybody, some of which I think some of you have already seen this, read it perhaps. So I'll skim through this pretty quickly and just maybe highlight a few issues just to amplify some of the points. So we have a Duncan Airport today. It's out on Langtree Road, about 2 miles out of the city of Duncan. It's owned by Butler Brothers Supplies, has been for the last 50 plus years. And they have very graciously made it available to the Duncan Flying Club, who actually manage it and have done so for the last 50 years. and at a great deal to the Flying Club, and I'd suggest a great deal to the community too. It's out there, it just does its thing quietly, makes a big contribution to the community in many ways, and is a great resource. However, it's a small site, and because it's built on a glacial moraine, which is a valuable source of gravel, it's been excavated over the years. It has a short runway. As you can see here, it's only 1,500 feet long, which just about works for local flyers, but doesn't really serve the greater needs of the community as well as an airport could. It's out of the prevailing wind, which comes out of the valley, and as you can see here, it's about 45 degrees to the runway. So that tends to limit use of the airport and make it interesting for those that fly out of there from time to time. And the current configuration doesn't leave any space for expansion. If anything, the thing is shrinking, and that circle I just put in place there represents an area that was actually taken out since this photograph was taken. So there's absolutely no room for expansion, additional traffic or activities there at all. And ultimately, the site has a finite life. We don't know when that'll be, and that's part of the uncertainty and why we got involved. But at some point, that airport is going to change one way or another to something, and we don't know what that's going to be yet. And just to amplify that, there's an area at the south end there that's just recently been purchased and is being excavated so that the runway didn't have to be excavated. So that's how tight this whole thing is starting to become. That being said, given its constraints, there's a lot of things going on there that actually benefit the local and broader community. This is an air ambulance flight. It just so happened that the helipad at the hospital was shut down. You can actually see in the background the fog bank over Nanaimo. So as befits an air transport network, there was another opportunity here to get the patient out, which was the Duncan Airport. BC Hydro uses it for power line inspections. The RCMP uses it for incidents. D&D uses it for search and rescue practice. Local companies such as the Promac Group, who support the logging industry, use it extensively. And the Duncan Flying Club itself, there's about 90 members there, 30 airplanes probably, of which maybe 10 or 12 fly with any regularity. It's not a busy place, but it is a valuable community asset. And another thing we get involved is search and rescue flights too. So the opportunity that we started to see was knowing, and through activities of people like George here, that BC communities are looking at their airports and saying, what is this resource we've got here? Perhaps it's a bit run down, perhaps there's a bit of neighborhood concern about it. What can we do to leverage this into an asset that benefits the broader community? And there's three main pillars that we see. The first is public transportation on a small scale. This is not going to be in Nanaimo. It's going to be something at a smaller scale that fosters tourism, allows businesses to bring in parts, customers, commute to Bellingham to pick up something, that kind of level of activity, maybe charter flights occasionally. The second pillar is public safety, which is, I think we'd probably all agree, is a growing area of concern given what we see as climate change and activities like that. And the big deal there is preparedness and being ready for these possibilities. I was in the wildfire suppression business for 10 years with Con Air at Abbotsford. I traveled the world writing proposals for governments for forest fire fighting. And a community that has a functioning airport, that has a plan built into it for handling crews, aircraft, refueling, that sort of thing, is in a much better place than the community that doesn't have such an asset. The other part is disaster response, and the provincial earthquake preparedness plan envisages 3 major hubs in the southwest, that being Nanaimo, Abbotsford, and Vancouver, and then a feeder network, spoke and hub and spoke system with local airports in each community group to take care of evacuation and bringing in supplies, and we don't have that. The airport we have can nowhere near accommodate anything like that. So there's a missing piece of the network there. And thirdly, and this is where we started, the partnerships in the development of light industrial land. Airports have typically been built with lots of space, and that space can be used for many other things, and one of those would be economic activity. Perhaps as a hub for a center of excellence of some sort that befits the economic activity in the community. Maybe a subcontracted work from another place like Victoria Airport, which is getting built out and very expensive. So these are high-paying jobs that help develop the local economy. So what this might look like, this is a vision from another community airport in the southwest, would be an airport with a runway, which is sort of the heart of it, and the lever really that enables all the other things to happen. So there would be an air transportation component, perhaps with a small terminal, maybe a little restaurant, something of that nature. Then a public safety component, which could be a warehouse, a staging area, refueling, helipads, this sort of thing, where an air tanker group could be based, which could happily operate off our local lakes and so on. And an industrial component, which would be the kind of bread and butter of the setup to actually bring in revenue to help pay for the ongoing operation of the facility. So that's one provisional vision for what this could potentially look like. So Duncan Flying Club for the last 9 months has been working with Economic Development Cowichan and putting out feelers, talking to stakeholders, gathering letters of support, which I understand you've seen. And it appears that the initiative may align with the goal of creating more industrial land for the valley, and that would be one plus. The other would be some of those elements that are defined in Cowichan 2050, like public safety, transportation, and so on. Letters of support, these are the ones we've received to date. One of the ones that you probably find particularly interesting is from the Nanaimo Airport Commission. They're doing their thing. They're in the mass transportation business. They're doing very well. They're expanding. But when the CEO, Mike Hooper, looked at a map of the southwest coast, he said there's a big gap here. He put his finger on it, and he says that's the Cowichan Valley. The Cowichan Valley is not part of the air access network for public safety and transportation purposes. Other letters of support are on their way. One, again, I think you'll find of interest. I talked to the superintendent of air tanker operations for BC. And he said, absolutely, if we had an appropriately sized strip with a facility for fueling, resting crews, this sort of thing, an air tanker group, if should the need arise, could certainly be based here, and it would have access to Lake Cowichan, Shawnigan Lake, and so on, because the fleet is now diversified into water scooping aircraft. So that would be an excellent fit for, in the eventuality there was a bit of a disaster here. So our request is that Economic Development Cowichan bring forward recommendations with respect to conducting an airport feasibility study. That is to look at all these components and way beyond that, and to see if this is actually a viable proposition. We anticipate the study will look at site options, which would include site selection criteria, of which there would be many, things like access to public transportation, residential areas, potential for growth, land values, all these sort of things would need to be looked at. And the capital and long-term maintenance costs that can be supported by outside funding sources, to which I think I would add to this private sources as well, because we have talked to people who would derive great benefit from having a more usable airport who are interested in putting money into a project like this. And the club has formed a steering committee. There's actually 4 of us. John is one of them, I'm one, and there are 2 other people with extensive aerospace and aviation backgrounds who would be more than willing to contribute to the process. Thank you very much.
Great. Are there any questions for Robert at this time before we have George come up to the podium? Director Stone.
Just quickly, you mentioned letter of support from the Nanaimo Airport, and I had that question before you got to that slide, but because I know when they come to our council and talk about the growth that they have planned for the airport, that the recreational users, the flying clubs there are being squeezed out. So they're going to be looking to be rehomed as well as the Nanaimo Airport continues to grow around commercial and cargo operations. So I think it's, you know, an important amenity for sure, and I can only anticipate that as they grow, you'd see more of that recreational base be attracted to something like that as well.
I think that's a possibility. I think the trick will be when we look at those 3 components that make up the airport potentially, it'll be finding the right balance and making sure there's enough revenue coming in to actually be able to run it, and where the general aviation on a large scale actually can contribute to that. I think that's one of the things we would need to look at. What's the finished mix of what would be on this site? So I recognize what you're saying, and I think there's some potential there. But I think we would need to be on top of that to make sure that we ended up with what we wanted in terms of economic development and so on. Thank you.
We have Director Dory and then Director Marcotte.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that the site is finite in the length that you can use it. the current site?
It's suitable for light aircraft and people who are used to using it. It can be a challenging place to fly out of, and so we can continue to use it as long as Butler Brothers decides that can be its purpose.
Yeah.
But that's out of our hands.
And I can see that the runway is only one direction, so you're limited landing and takeoffs with the wind?
No, you can actually land from both ends, and we do, but definitely it's easier to land from the south because it actually goes uphill, which is
So
beneficial.
your plan is to look for another site and to, like we search for a hospital site, you'll be searching for an airport site?
I
Is that-
think what we would propose is we establish a set of criteria based on some sort of potential model for the airport. And then we would look at all possible sites, and I would think the study would probably present more than one option. It's not impossible that site could be redeveloped, but there are some other limitations that I haven't addressed today. So it's a complicated jigsaw of factors, I think, for any airport site. And I think the purpose of the study would be to pin that down and present options.
Director Marcotte.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to the delegate. I know that Nanaimo had an awful lot of trouble when they first started out because of the impact that it had on the neighboring homes that were there, and that lasted for many, many years before they were able to find a way to make that work. So is there anything that will impact your dreams on that, or?
Well, that's a good question. There is now a mandated public consultation process from the 1st of January last year. Transport Canada has sort of pushed that down to the municipal level and requires that there be a public consultation process. So that, from our perspective, is the only way to do it and to bring the population along and sell it on these benefits. And so over the build-up to potentially doing it, I think that would be an exercise that would need to be done. And I think George can talk a little bit more about that in terms of how you actually bring an enthusiasm within the community to supporting the local airport as opposed to finding it something that perhaps they don't want.
And just to follow up, I know that with numerous flights that fly over the Nanaimo airport, that the families that used to be across the road and had the big complaints with it, they seem much happier now, but now all the big planes go over my house, and I can see and read underneath everything. So
Well,
it doesn't bother me. I love the sound of an airplane going by in the morning.
Well, I mean, that's top of the list, I think, of one of the top items in the site selection process to gauge impact and support for any given site.
Yeah, I would suggest you need to talk to the people who live in the Yellow Point Cedar area.
All right, thank you. Noted.
Okay, we'd like to then thank you, Robert, and welcome George Miller to the podium.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Good morning, George,
directors.
and thank you for coming to Cowichan.
Thank you very much. And also all those present. Just so I don't appear as coming out of thin air, just a bit about my background. I was 35 years in the Air Force. I retired in '87. I've been flying for about 65 years. Retired as base commander of the senior base in Saskatchewan. I know the lower mainland, well, the BC air situation very well. I managed Langley Airport for 22 years and a few other airports. I still manage Squamish. And have interest in the development of a few other airports, including this one, of course, and the Soyuz and Squamish. I know Duncan Airport not really well, but having toured it and seen it and heard a lot about it, and I can understand and appreciate what Robert has said about this airport. It does provide benefit to the community, although very limited. And one must admit that the economic impact of Duncan Airport may not be great, but its services impact is good. Certainly for emergency services and and like Medevac, RCMP, DND. These are sort of things that a community expects of its airport. Communities that have successful airports normally start out with the premise that a community with an airport is fortunate indeed. Airports can exert an economic, social, and cultural impact, all provided that it is recognized that the aim is to develop it to be an important additional nodal in its transportation system and be an added attraction to the community for business particularly, all under local control. Let's take Langley Airport in BC, Lower Mainland, to examine it, because I know it so well. I was there 22 years. I handed it over to my son, who was there for the last 8 years, and then I was asked to come and manage Pitt Meadows Airport while it was going through transfer to another airport manager, and they wanted me to pick that manager out. So I went across the country, and lo and behold, my son threw in his hat on that, and although I had nothing to do with it, the mayor and council picked my son to manage it. He's over there now, started 3 months ago, and Langley Airport now is just about built out, so the challenge is not as great as it used to be. My son loves it, the challenge of Pitt Meadows. So let's look at Langley, and I look at Langley with, of course, the background of experience there. In 1991, when I arrived there, it was really a failing 120-acre airport with a short 2,100-foot unlit asphalt runway and a 2,300-foot grass runway and a small lit helipad. It had four small helicopter companies and a large recreational general aviation tenant base with 2 supporting training schools and maintenance shops. That was pretty well it. The tenant base with 2 supporting training schools and maintenance shops were the backbone of the airport. In fact, it flew an awful lot, but there was really of little value other than the training to the community. There was really no attempt to bring in business. The Township of Langley Council had just ended employment of its first airport manager after only 1 year and was actively considering a proposal to turn the site into university grounds, particularly for Kwantlen College, which now is situated in Langley, but in locations, fortunately, other than the airport. In fact, while this was getting a lot of regional media attention, I was offered a year-to-year contract by Township to be airport manager. Initially, at 3 days a week. The contract was based on my being able to actually achieve completion of a submission that I had presented to Council of a 5-year Langley Airport Improvement Plan that, if on its successful completion, I would submit in 1997 a 20-year strategic plan. The Airport Improvement Plan was based on $420,000 seed money that the Township had accumulated as airport surplus revenue over a number of years as a result of not having spent any money on the airport. Which was a shame, but it just happened to work out really well, that was the seed money that allowed me to get going on an actual airport improvement plan. In the plan, expenditure would be based on concentrating on what I presented as the 4 most fundamental characteristics of a successful community airport. They are, firstly, to develop infrastructure and beautification to reflect an open for business airport. Secondly, influence favorable community attitudes towards the airport. Thirdly, establish sound financial management basis based on a council policy of annual mandatory budget operation in the black. And fourthly, strict conduct within aeronautical and municipal regulations and legislation. My main budget ingredients over the next 5 years, under expenses consisted of, firstly, to be built, and none of this was there before, was a perimeter fence to enclose the airport. And all this was aimed at those 4 main characteristics of a successful airport. An airside groundside fence that would separate operational aircraft and from vehicles and personnel so that you had basic security. A ramp and security lights so you could see the place. Runway lights. This was enabled following successful application for the last grant ever to be issued under the Federal Community Airport Grants Program before it handed that responsibility over to the provinces. And that sum was $300,000, which I added to the $420,000. And as you know, the BC Air Access Program right now, in this province, it's gone through a few iterations over the years, but that's the present one, and that is to replace the federal involvement in supporting community airports. Built an aircraft wash bay, so anybody with an aircraft on the airport could wash its aircraft free of charge. Needed a Jet A fuel truck. It had no Jet A fuel for large helicopters, which I was hoping to attract to the airport. 2 self-serve avgas fuel dispensers. Langley Airport was the first one in the province to acquire automatic self-serve fuel dispensers. Public airport viewing and picnic area, felt this was really critical. Let's start adding right away value-added benefits to the community of having its airport, and to use it for some major local events such as Canada Day. 2 airport internal connector roads, which are necessary to keep people off the surrounding major roads. Landscape beautification points, that was important. The airport had to look up and with a active building, progressive community. Now that's the expense side. To enable certain projects within it, council was very good in this. I was allowed to particularly identify projects within a short-term project loan possibility that I could get from the township general revenue under prevailing local interest rates, but annual payments had to be included in the airport budget. That was critical. So because a lot of times the project was more than I could afford to spend out of the budget right away, but I could get a loan and then start paying it back right away over 2 or 3, 4 years. And that was critical. The main budget revenue sources were from tenant land leases, fuel sales, and any airport, and there's a few that feel that there's no money in fuel, is absolutely up the wrong tree, because fuel is one of the major revenue sources of the airport. So when I arrived at Langley and found that it was being operated by Shell at the time. I had Shell move out within a matter of a couple of months, took it over. I was making 1.5 cents a liter from Shell, and when I took it over right away, we were making 13 cents a liter per ship from fuel sales. And that turned out to be one of our most attractive revenue sources. Aircraft tie-downs, visitor parking, successful grant applications, made sure there's always a grant application on the go, and of course filming. Filming is huge business. In Pet Meadows, it's one of the major revenue sources. In Langley, it became. Some of the significant movies made have parts of Langley in it. I did complete the airport improvements plan and submitted a strategic plan in 1997. I based it on marketing the airport as a niche location for the helicopter industry. And mainly because the runways were short. A 2,100-foot runway is not going to attract small commercial jet aircraft or small commuter aircraft. It's just too short. And so going after the helicopter industry was huge. 10 years after starting of the strategic plan, a township economic impact report, and I have a copy of it here, and I'd like to leave with you, Madam Chair.
That's great. If you could just wrap up, George, that'd be great.
And the 10 years after start, then the township authored this economic study of the airport, and it showed a total employment impact of 394 persons, a total payroll impact of $16,667,000, and a total economic impact of $67,960,000 and growing. The airport consistently operated in the black. When I retired there as airport manager in 2012, the airport had the largest concentration of helicopter companies in Canada at 31. And right now it's probably about 34, 35 now. Before closing, a couple of points I believe is worth mentioning. Now, I can defend them from experience and knowledge of practices at other community airports in BC, and I know the governance model of every airport that is certified in our province. Firstly, governance. The most effective for a community is to govern it by its mayor and council, directly through its director of engineering, and to the airport manager. That is what is changing at Pitt Meadows. When I was there for 4.5 months, completely changing it around. It has to be governed more directly by the body that owns the airport. And engage no other advisory body, because as soon as an advisory body is between the airport manager and the council, things start running awry. There's just too many cooks in the broth sort of thing, and the mayor and council have always been wise enough to, if there's something that doesn't look right, is to find out why it is that way to them and find a way of fixing it through the airport manager. Secondly, establish lease agreements without inversion clauses. Langley is the only airport right now in the province that has no inversion clauses. If you buy, because all the land, of course, is owned and leased by mayor and council to the airport manager, and you build something on the airport, you get the longest lease possible. And normally we'd like to see it at sort of 30 years is about right, with a 5-year option to renew, at the end of which, and at any time during, the owner of the building can sell it at fair market value, and can sell it as almost a full lease, because he has kept the building up and available to sell at fair market value. So you can always expect to find your whole inventory of hangars and things that are on the airport privately owned. You're not involved with fixing them yourselves, and they are involved in fixing them up and keeping them looking great, because they know they can sell them and for a profit. And the person who comes in and is building is taking over a building that can be a credit to the airport. And this works extremely well. And if you were to drive by Langley Airport and look at its hangars, there isn't anything that doesn't look well maintained and very credible.
Thank you, George. Are you just wrapping up now?
Yeah, just a very at the end, and at the end of the lease period, which allows for the leaseholder improvements such as development of a business hangar that can be sold at any time with a lease renewal to the buyer for an extended period. That allows the selling leaseholder a good return on his investment. I think I'm trying to make that point. And this becomes a tremendous marketing advantage. It's so easy to market an airport that is operated like that. So the place is completely, at Langley, is completely marketed out. So I'd like to just close, Madam Chair, by saying thank you for the opportunity. I'm wishing Robert and his efforts all the best in seeing a great new airport one day here in the Cowichan Valley.
Great. Thank you for sharing all that information. It's been a pleasure. So we'd like to, I would suggest a referral to staff for more information to the committee. It's been moved and seconded. Are there any other questions or information? Alternate Director Salmon.
Just a quick question. Timing's good today.
So is it George you'd like to speak to, or Robert?
Oh, Robert, I think. What's the scope for regular scheduled helicopter flights to Victoria from Duncan? I'm asking, probably most people know the Melhat's closed today. I just came from the Mill Bay Ferry, which has a huge line.
That's a good question. We one of the organizations we contacted was Helijet, more along the lines of medevac flights and where the airport would need to be to satisfy their requirements. Mm-hmm. But you've opened up another possibility there, which we've not yet explored. So I think we would add that to the list. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so there has been a motion moved and seconded. I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. We'd like to thank you very much for coming today and sharing that information. Moving on now to correspondence.
No correspondence,
Information.
no information items.
Reports.
We do have a report from the Manager of Communications and Engagement, and Chris Schumacher will introduce the 2018 Referenda Public Information Campaign.
Good morning, Chris.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, directors. I'll try to keep this verbal report very brief. We have a couple of short presentations to follow, so I want to save time for those. But quickly just to say that at the last meeting, there was quite a bit of discussion around public information about the referenda that are going to go before our communities and ensuring that people were going to have the right information to make informed decisions. So just quickly wanted to run through some of the key components of this public information campaign for you so you're aware of the activities that are going to be happening over the next 6 to 7 weeks. The first and one of the largest components of this is going to be a household flyer that's going to be about 33,000 copies going out to every household within the Cowichan Valley Regional District jurisdiction, which will be a very high-level overview of both of the services, what the need is for the services, the benefits, and some frequently asked questions that people may have, with obviously pointers to our website and other places where people can find more detailed information. So if nothing else, people will at least have that delivered directly to them to be armed with that information going to the polls. We're also going to have a series of 5 open houses throughout the region, which we'll have elected officials, CVRD staff, and representatives from our various stakeholders available and on hand to help answer questions and present materials. Those are going to be kicking off September 19th at the Lake Cowichan Curling Club, September 24th at Aggie Hall in Ladysmith, September 26th at the Duncan United Church, October 2nd at Forbes Hall in Thetis Island, and October 9th at the Mill Bay Community Hall, all happening between 6:30 and 9 p.m. And we really hope that you'll all be able to join us for those. And then, of course, we'll have a series of radio ads that'll be promoting both of the services and the open houses to increase attendance there. Print ads, as you could imagine. We'll have a series of blogs for each of the referendum issues, detailing the need across the region for the services and what they'll accomplish if approved by residents. Our website will be updated to include all the detailed information and have hopefully some easy navigation for people landing on our homepage to find information about the referenda and elections. And then the purpose today is kind of the ambassador info package that we're going to be delivering to you at the end of the week, which will have 2 PowerPoint presentations that overview the services, the need for them, as well as when you receive this package, you'll also have a copy of a digital version of the household flyer, so you'll have that information as well. And so I wanted to, this is going to be a really key component of, I think, the public information campaign, is making sure that you as directors and as well all the external ambassadors have appropriate information at their disposal when they're talking to their communities and constituents, and everybody kind of singing from the same songbook. So I'll now invite Bev Suderman, a senior planner, and Kate Miller, our manager of environmental services, to come up and deliver those presentations to you so that you can hear the language and the level of detail that we'll be presenting in those presentations, so you have your understanding of it when you receive it later this week.
Thank you, Chris. I'd just like to give a little reminder for all electronics. I'm hearing a lot of ding-donging around the board table and also in the gallery. Just if you can turn your electronics onto mute, it'd be appreciated. Thank you. Welcome, Bev.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So it's my pleasure today to walk you through the presentation that we've prepared for ambassadors, including yourselves, as we move forward with the referendum information process. I'm not seeing it in my presenter view. Just a moment here while I get myself organized. Brad, can you help me, please? I get so flustered. What I want is the one where it shows the current slide and the next one coming up.
Can we close the door from his?
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So it seems important to contextualize both of these referendum questions in terms of the CVRD's vision, which is that Cowichan communities will be the most livable and healthy in Canada. October 20th is the local government election day. This year, voters in the Cowichan region will have the opportunity to choose their future on 2 referendum questions on key issues facing our community. Both are linked to our quality of life. Both are about choosing a future that is livable and sustainable, yet economically viable. The 2 referendum questions relate to 2 proposed services: drinking water and watershed protection and affordable housing. The CVRD wants to ensure that every eligible voter has an understanding and awareness of what is being proposed so they can make an informed choice when they cast their vote. Eligible voters are both renters and property owners. So we've included that in the speaking notes because we've heard in the community that many renters think that they're not eligible to vote in the local government elections. So we want to make sure that that point is clearly made. So this particular presentation is about the affordable housing service. What we know so far about affordable housing is that escalating housing prices are making affordability a concern for Canadians across the income spectrum. But for people with lower incomes, it's a basic quality of life and health issue. The increasing cost of housing is outstripping increases in people's incomes. This affects working people, seniors, families, businesses, and the economy, and it increases the number of homeless people in our communities. The issue is regional, and it touches on every community within the CVRD. We also know that many different types of affordable housing are needed. We know from the BC Nonprofit Housing Association research that 750 units of affordable housing are needed right now. Single-family dwellings are the easiest and the most profitable housing for the private sector to build, and therefore the housing stock in the Cowichan region is 90% or more single-family dwellings, which are the most expensive form of housing to buy or rent. Apartments, townhouses, and other less expensive forms of housing are required to provide options for seniors, families, workers, single people, young people, and other groups of people who are not already in the market. We need to build community capacity within the region to create the needed affordable housing. Nonprofit organizations do not necessarily have the skill sets at this time to build or manage housing, although their client groups need it. With the cost of building today, developers need incentives or other forms of support to be able to build affordable housing. Financial institutions need to have confidence in the projects and the ability of the organization or the developer to be able to complete the project. Government funders need good data and confidence in the project to be able to award funding. Multiple skill sets are needed to create affordable housing. Partnership approaches are complex, but they generally work best, and seed money can help with many of these challenges. We also know that federal and provincial governments reduced investments in housing in the 1990s, and the investment that they have been making has been very limited for 30 years. Recently, federal and provincial governments have announced funding for housing through the National Housing Strategy and the BC Housing Plan. In both of these cases, local government involvement and financial investment are critically important to accessing these funds. We need to invest in our future through the Cowichan Housing Association Financial Contribution Service. Unlike municipalities, regional districts in BC require a service establishment bylaw to undertake specific activities and raise funds through taxation for those activities. Such bylaws require approval of residents. In the case of the 2 proposed services in the 2018 referendum, this includes all residents in the CVRD who are eligible to vote, and again, stressing that they can be renters or property owners.